orcs, uruks, and goblins. They're an essential part of all three main stories in Tolkien's Legendarium, and yet they're at the centre of one of the most enduring questions regarding the lore of Middle-earth. So, what's the difference? Alla Tulia Meldonia Ahara Mariese, my name's Rainbow Dave, and welcome to a brand new episode of Tolkien Untangled. So, in this lore video, I'm going to try and tackle that tricky question. But I warn you now, the answer is both very simple and also frustratingly complex. But let's start with the straightforward answer. What's the difference between goblins, orcs, and uruks? Well, on the one hand, nothing, really. These three words are just different terms for the same creature in three separate languages. In The Hobbit, orcs are most commonly referred to as goblins, which is obviously an English word that entered our language through the French-speaking Norman conquest back in 1066, which, incidentally, Tolkien considered the worst thing ever to happen to England. So in Tolkien's future writings, he made a really conscious effort to move away from words with French etymologies, and so in The Lord of the Rings, and of course the later Silmarillion, the word goblin is, for the most part, replaced with the Old English Germanic word orc. But both of these words refer to the exact same creature, and they can be used completely interchangeably, and we actually see this in the name of the blade Orcrist, Orc wrist, which translates to goblin cleaver. Orc and goblin refer to the exact same thing. However, this is made a little bit more confusing when we look at Peter Jackson's movies. In both the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, there does seem to be a very visual distinction between the small, subterranean goblins in the Misty Mountains, the larger orcs of Mordor, and the even larger Uruks of Gundabad and Isengard. But considering what Tolkien actually wrote, this doesn't make very much sense. The orcs of Gundabad are the orcs of the Misty Mountains. I mean, alright, technically, Mount Gundabad is right on the cusp between the Misty Mountains and the Grey Mountains, but that would have no impact on the size of the orcs living there. And it's a bit crazy that Azog and his soldiers in The Hobbit are like these huge hulking creatures, but the orcs of Moria in The Lord of the Rings are really small. Azog was the chieftain of the orcs of Moria. And look, I suppose it is possible that Azog would be larger than the average orc, like he is their chief, but it makes no sense that his army would be visually different from the orcs that the Fellowship encounter in Balin's tomb, or the orcs encountered in Goblin Town. They are all orcs of the Misty Mountains, and thus they're all descended from the orcs sent by Sauron to occupy those mountains throughout the Second and Third Ages. However, before I continue, I will say this in defense of the movies. Although orcs and goblins are interchangeable terms for the same being, there is undoubtedly a huge amount of variety amongst individuals. You know, in the Fellowship of the Ring, we are told that Aragorn slays a huge orc chieftain in Moria, although even this huge orc is only almost man-high. But anyway, we're later told that the other orcs of Moria are smaller than the orcs of Mordor, led by Grishnak, led by this guy. And the orcs of Mordor are smaller than the Isengarders, even though the Isengarders were probably originally recruited from the orcs of the Misty Mountains in the first place. So there certainly isn't any hard and fast rule about orc sizes, or any kind of particular correlation to any specific location. So you know what? I'll stop throwing shade at the Peter Jackson movies. Anyway, back on topic, the next question is, where do Uruks fit into all this? And are Uruks the same as Uruk-hai? Well, to answer the second question first, on the one hand, no. But on the other hand, maybe? So, just like orc and goblin, Uruk is just another word in another language to refer to the same race. We get orc from the Sindarin orc, and also from the Westron orca, and also from a few variations of like real-world Old English. In fact, Tolkien actually claims he took the word from Beowulf, which he translated, although the original Old English word is orcneas. Anyway, we get Uruk from the black speech of Mordor. But just to muddy this already confusing topic, although Uruk does just mean orc, the word is usually reserved exclusively for the bigger, stronger orcs. In fact, in Appendix F of Return of the King, Tolkien tells us that no doubt was the word Uruk of the black speech, though this was applied as a rule only to the great soldier orcs that at this time issued from Mordor and Isengard. The lesser kinds were called, especially by the Uruk-hai, Snaga, slave. So, although all Uruks are indeed orcs, perhaps not all orcs are Uruks. And this brings us to another very interesting question. Who was the first guy to breed Uruks? When I first watched the Lord of the Rings movies, I assumed it was Saruman. That's kind of what seems to be implied. But Tolkien tells us that this is not actually the case. The earliest chronological reference to the race of Uruks are the black orcs of great strength that first appeared out of Mordor 284 years before Saruman even arrived in Isengard. Now, obviously I should say the orcs themselves were first invented by Morgoth, and that was way, way back in the First Age, but it is kind of impossible for us to say whether his orcs were Uruks. As I just said, Uruk is a word from the black speech of Mordor, which wasn't invented until the Second Age, so there really is no way that that word could have been applied to orcs of the First Age, even if they were legitimately bigger and badder than other orcs. But the next question is, does that mean Uruks are the same as Uruk-hai? Well, this is actually quite a controversial question. Uruk-hai literally means orc folk, just as Olog-hai literally means troll folk. And this might imply that Uruks and Uruk-hai really aren't that different. But, as far as I can tell, there isn't a single reference to any of Sauron's Uruks being referred to as Uruk-hai, except for a brief line of dialogue in Return of the King where an orc of Mordor wonders if they are searching for an elf, a dwarf, or as he puts it, a pack of rebel Uruk-hai, which I guess could refer to a rebel of either Mordor or a rebel of Isengard. It's very unclear. But other than that single ambiguous line, Uruk-hai do seem to be an exclusively Saruman thing. But then, what is the actual difference between Uruks and Uruk-hai? Well, I guess a big thing to consider is their relationship with sunlight. In the Two Towers, the Orcs of Moria, who are confusingly earlier referred to as Black Uruks of Mordor, just because we can't have anything be simple, these Orcs of Moria complain to Ugluk and his Uruk-hai of Isengard that we can't run in the sunlight. And I guess I used to think that this meant that the Misty Mountain Orcs were physiologically incapable of going out in the sun, kind of like stone trolls, I guess, whereas Saruman's Uruk-hai can withstand the sun due to some kind of superior breeding, or something, I don't know. But this may not be the case. Ugluk's response to the Moria Orc is this: "You'll run with me behind you. What's the use of sending out mountain maggots on a trip only half trained?" And this suggests that the main difference between Saruman's Uruk-hai and the Orcs of Moria is less to do with superior breeding and more to do with superior training. So, are Ugluk and his Uruk-hai basically just Uruks or Orcs or Goblins of the Misty Mountains that Saruman trained to be stronger and faster? It's still kind of unclear. And there's a few more lines in the Two Towers that just make everything even more confusing. Because in the Helm's Deep chapter, at the Battle of the Hornburg, Tolkien writes that the orcs yelled and jeered. But one of the things that these orcs actually yell is, "We are fighting Uruk-hai." So what are they? Tolkien calls them orcs, they call themselves Uruk-hai. And 4 chapters earlier, we have a chapter that is specifically called The Uruk-hai, and yet 2 chapters before that, Tolkien refers to said Uruk-hai as goblin soldiers of greater stature. So, to go back to our original question of what's the difference, the answer is, it's complicated. But there are a few things that we can say with surety. First, orcs and goblins are interchangeable words that refer to all creatures of that evil race, whether they be weak little Snaga or big old black Uruks. Second, the word Uruk does technically refer to all orcs, but it is mostly reserved for the biggest and strongest, and specifically the biggest and strongest orcs of Mordor. Whereas it seems Uruk-hai refers to the orc folk of Isengard that were improved, I say that with air quotes, by better training and equipment thanks to Saruman. But despite what the movies suggest, I don't think the Uruk-hai are really a separate subspecies of orc in Tolkien's writings. They aren't created in pods by Saruman, they're just stronger and larger and smarter elites. And whereas the Uruks of Mordor are armed with the curved scimitars usual with orcs, although at least one of them does carry a long saw-edged knife, the Uruk-hai of Isengard are described as being armed with short, broad-bladed swords, and they had bows of yew in length and shape like the bows of men. So, really, I think what this all boils down to is the fact that Saruman endowed his Isengarders with better weapons and better training, and that is why they seem superior to the orcs of the Misty Mountains and of Mordor. However, before I can finish this video, there is a whole other dog in this race that I've not yet mentioned. And these guys definitely are different from your standard orcs, uruks, and goblins. So, let's take a short moment to talk all about the gruesomely enigmatic half-orcs of Isengard. Now, with the exception of a throwaway line about goblin men, half-orcs do not appear at all in the movies, but in the books, they're pretty important. So, in the final chapter of Morgoth's Ring, we're given a rather harrowing account of how half-orcs first came to exist in Middle-earth, and it portrays Saruman in a really negative light. So, Tolkien states, in reference to the First Age, so well before Saruman was even a thing, men could, under the domination of Morgoth, or his agents, in a few generations be reduced almost to the orc level of mind and habits. And then they would, or could be made, to mate with orcs, producing new breeds, often larger and more cunning. And then Tolkien goes on to say, there is no doubt that long afterwards, in the Third Age, Saruman rediscovered this, or learned of it in lore, and in his lust for mastery committed this, his wickedest deed, the interbreeding of orcs and men, producing both men-orcs, large and cunning, and orc-men, treacherous and vile. So, congratulations, Saruman, you successfully did something so heinously evil that even Sauron didn't think to try it. Morgoth would be proud of you. Anyway, I really don't want to speculate on the mechanics of how orcs breed with men. I'll let you guys ponder that one in your own time. But we do see half-orcs used quite a few times throughout the books by Saruman. At Helm's Deep, Aragorn says, we had many of these half-orcs to deal with, and right at the very end of the story, during the scouring of the Shire, Pippin and Merry fight some of Saruman's ruffians, who up until this point have generally been described as men, but we are told that Merry himself slew the leader, a great brute like a huge orc. Now, we're never explicitly told which unfortunate group of men it was that Saruman reduced almost to the orc level, but I feel like I can say with a fair degree of confidence that the answer is the men of Dunland, the Dunlendings, also known as the Wild Men. And I have to say that, despite the fact they are clearly villains in The Lord of the Rings, I actually have quite a lot of time for the men of Dunland. Like, relative to orcs, or even the Black Númenóreans, I don't think the men of Dunland are inherently evil. They're just people who were ousted from their ancestral lands, and they want it back. It's a very human conflict that they have with the men of Rohan, and it's even said that their Dunlending language, their ancient language, once was spoken in many western valleys of the Mark. And it wasn't until the Lords of Gondor gave their home to the ancestors of the Rohirrim, who the Dunlendings call Robbers of the North, that they were forced out and relocated to Dunland. So I can hardly blame the Dunlendings for joining Saruman's army. However, I can 100% blame Saruman for corrupting some of them into treacherous and vile orc men. And I think the existence of half-orcs in Saruman's service is a testament to just how awful Saruman eventually became. He may not have created a new race of Uruk-hai like he did in the movies, but in the books he does something so much worse. Screw you, Saruman. You deserve to get your throat slit. Anyway, that's what I've got on orcs, uruks, and goblins, but just before I finish this video, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you guys who have waited so patiently for new videos over the past 6 months. I know quite a few of you have asked me when I'll continue with the First Age series, and to all of you guys, I promise the wait is almost over. I know I've been saying that since November, but it's true. New Silmarillion videos will be coming very soon. Over the next few weeks, I'll release a few more lore videos just like this one, just to kind of get the ball rolling again. But after that, I will be releasing a whole new series continuing the story of the elves and the Silmarils and the original Dark Lord Morgoth. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you're new to the channel and you're not familiar with the First Age videos, I definitely urge you to check them out. I've made 4 episodes detailing the beginning of days, which is the earliest history of Middle-earth and the origins of the elves, and I've also made a 6-part series telling the tale of the great elven smith Feanor and the forging of the Silmarils and the origins of the epic War of the Jewels, which span the entirety of the First Age. So if you've ever wanted to learn more about the Silmarillion and the early history of Middle-earth, but you find the lore is written by Tolkien a little bit challenging to read through, as I myself did for many years, I definitely recommend giving those videos a watch before I upload the new First Age series, just in order to make sure that you're not missing the beginning of the story. I'll leave a link to them in the section below. And it's actually my intention over the lifetime of this channel to tell the full story of Tolkien's entire legendarium, pretty much chronologically from the very beginning to the very end, untangling all the writings of like the Silmarillion, the unfinished tales, the enormous history of Middle-earth, and of course the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss anything in the future. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and a comment to let me know your thoughts. Anyway, as always, my dear friends, until next time, much love, stay groovy, and Nevaya Melanine.